Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show, a SKOL search edition, and we're going to be talking quarterbacks today. The Vikings have a huge decision this offseason and how they're going to attack the quarterback of the future. So we brought in expert Eric Edholm, draft analyst from NFL.com, to talk to us about what the Vikings could be looking at in this quarterback class and how they should be addressing the quarterback of the future. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
What's going on, man?
Welcome to the Real Forno Show. Managing editor of the USA Today's Vikings Wire. Betting and college football analysis for the Fantasy Points website. Publisher of Substack Run and Shooter. Host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, as well as a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special afternoon edition of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, producer Dave in the bottom right corner. I got the point right this time. And as you can see to my left, NFL.com's lead draft analyst, Eric Edholm, good friend of mine, is here to talk quarterbacks today. Eric, how are you?
Quarterbacks. Have you done any of that this pre-draft season here? I mean, I don't know. It's a position we gloss over so quickly these days, you know?
Yeah, I've been talking a lot about quarterbacks. I wrote a feature piece about why I think the drafting Hendon Hooker is a big mistake, and then I'm writing one on trading up for Will Levis and the merits of it here this afternoon once we're done with the show. But I want to get your opinions, Eric, because when we spoke down in Mobile, we didn't talk a lot of quarterbacks. We were talking a lot of the guys that were already in Mobile, and there really wasn't a lot of high-end draft talent there this year, but there was a lot of good. So I kind of want to start at the top of the class. Who's your number one guy?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the size concerns with Bryce Young, but I think there's a lot to like about him. There's also a lot to like about C.J. Stroud without those concerns. And they're different quarterbacks, but you know, if I had to pick somebody that I had kind of the fewest major concerns about, maybe not the sky high upside, the thrilling athletic plays, but I just think Stroud has a tiny bit better chance to be successful over the long haul. Now, I'm willing to admit that Richardson and Levis have the kind of thrilling upside that is hard to ignore. I think it's a reason why they're being placed near the top of the draft. But they also come with some issues that I think they have to be rectified or at least addressed, before somebody is willing to take a crack on them. So I've kind of got them in, I'd say, Stroud, Young with Richardson. You know, the range of outcomes is obviously a lot higher. And I've got Levis a very close fourth. I think he's not a perfectly clean prospect, but somebody that you absolutely can feel comfortable mocking in round one. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a little surprised at some of the slander on Levis this year. I know that there are some folks out there who get a little testy when you suggest he's going to be one of the top QBs drafted, but I think there are absolutely reasons why he at least belongs in that discussion.
I agree completely, and I think one of the reasons with Levis specifically is because there's this segment of people that are hyping him up to be like this next great thing when he's got real questions, and but he has talent. Let's start with Bryce Young. You're number one. He's actually my number three. And a couple of real concerns I have with him, obviously the height and size. We've seen other quarterbacks be able to create. You have Russell Wilson and Drew Brees who are able to really create their passing window. But we've also seen some struggles from those guys. We've seen struggles from Kyler Murray, who is built thicker and is much denser than what Bryce Young is. Obviously, Bryce Young weighed in at 204. How much of that was a real weight? We won't really know. There's going to be questions surrounding him. But my question for you, Eric, is a kind of pairing that in with in-structure play. I thought Bryce Average wasn't phenomenal in structure. I thought he was fine. But some of that quick game stuff, I'm wondering, in your opinion, how much of are you parsing out that he struggles with it versus Alabama and the struggles that they had on offense this year? Because let's be honest, it wasn't a great cast of characters he had with him.
Yeah, this was not a typical Alabama offense, right? I mean, obviously, every year we see great names leave the program, and there's always this, multiple 5 stars who appear ready to step up. The offensive line wasn't the group that we've seen in recent years. The receiver group certainly was not. They had a pretty good tight end in Cameron Latu, certainly a very good running back in Jahmyr Gibbs who could catch the ball. What fascinated me was how many empty sets they used. And I think it showed a level of trust in Bryce's understanding of protections and how to get the ball out fast. I'll disagree with you slightly on the quick game stuff. I realized there were some misfires there. Some of the accuracy wasn't as pristine as you'd like to see on some of those shorter throws and even some of the predetermined stuff. But I saw somebody who I felt like was processing very fast. If he was CJ Stroud's size, I'd probably like him better than Stroud. But the reason I put Stroud just a tick higher is because I think he has the total package, maybe not as much wow in his game. But I really like Young's ability to find backdoors and trapdoors when it looks like he's about to get sacked or there's trouble. And he's able to kind of salvage bad plays and turn them into plays you can live with. Those are kind of the hidden yard values that you wouldn't normally expect to show up for an Alabama player, right? I mean, usually they're the ones doing the stomping, right? But this past year, I felt like some of that really flourished.
Interesting. I'll have to go back once I'm
not saying
once
you're
I have
wrong.
some
I'm just
time.
saying I just think we have we
No.
saw things a little differently there. Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily completely agreeing you're right, but it's always good to hear different perspective, and then
Yeah.
you can go recheck yourself. I remember talking with Lance Zierlein about Jalen Hyatt, and he just thought that he was on a different level than I did. I'm like, I don't see it. So
I don't
I'm
either,
gonna
yeah.
try. Yeah, I'm gonna try and go see what he saw to try and get a better perspective. Because that's the only way really to learn. And something
Yeah.
I learned in the 2021 draft that I kind of want to relate to Bryce before we move on.
Yep.
The Zach Wilson phenomenon. Everybody loved how he was out of structure, how he kind of made some of those plays, but that in structure play was never really there, especially against top competition. That's kind of where I was at with Bryce. Do you see any kind of concerns? Because his best trait, in my opinion, is finding that hidden stuff, being Superman. Like when everything breaks down, you can trust Bryce to do something with it. But in the NFL, it's going to be a much more difficult task. How do you see that kind of translation, and do you have concerns about that?
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it, I think, which is, you shouldn't have to live in survival mode. So in a perfect world, right, he'd go somewhere where the situation around him isn't as dire. But let's say he ends up with the Texans. Okay, well, now we have some questions, right? First year play caller. I mean, Bobby Slowick could be a terrific offensive coordinator for all we know. Just don't really have that evidence yet. The skill position talent there is questionable. I would say the offensive line is, emerging at best, I think is how I would describe it, unless I'm not seeing the full potential there. I mean, Kenyon Green struggled as a rookie. We know Tunsil's really good. They have some other okay parts there. What I'm basically saying is that, yeah, it worries you to a degree that if he were to land in a place like that, where the use the word structure, I want to make sure I use a different word, in infrastructure, if you will, the pieces around him on offense aren't so weak and so limited, and the play caller isn't so beholden to one type of scheme where, you kind of put Young in a really bad situation. So I don't know. I mean, I just love the poise with which he handles himself. And again, I'm not going to dismiss the size questions like some people do. He had balls batted down at the line. He had plays where those windows closed up fast, and not everybody at his size can do that.
Yeah, the one thing that even if you're good enough with those size concerns, you still have to create for yourself, and you have to create those windows. There are limitations there. Somebody who does not have those limitations, as you kind of mentioned, is CJ Stroud. He is my number one player in the class right now. Admittedly, I have not watched Jalen Carter yet, so I do expect that to change. My biggest thing with Stroud is the dude is just money from anywhere on the field, throwing it to anywhere on the field, no matter who he's throwing it to. And that kind of consistency is why some people have kind of linked him to Jared Goff, just the ability to throw such a beautiful football. But he showed against Georgia that he can do more than that. My question for you is Stroud. Obviously, we see the arm talent. we see the ability that his receivers have on the outside. Like he had all world talent at the wide receiver position. Like you could argue that some of that room in 2021 is better than some rooms in the NFL. But the Georgia game is an anomaly. And my question for you is, do you have any concerns with that? And how much of that was an Ohio State scheme thing, really trying to hinder him from doing that? We didn't see Justin Fields do a lot of that in college,
True.
and now he's running everywhere for the Chicago Bears.
You know how many 100-yard games Justin Fields had in college? 2. I mean, you know, that I'm not saying that they're the same player by any means, right? But I'm saying that there is a context there that we have now seen with a recent example under the same play caller, Ryan Day, a very similar type of system in terms of really strong offensive line, great receiver talent, a lot of vertical shots. You know, I mean, the package is very similar to what Stroud had these past couple of years. So, yeah, it's funny. It was interesting hearing his comments at the combine. You could hear him saying like I wish I would have used my legs more. I think he was so ingrained in the system of go through your progression, you know, read high to low, touchdown to check down. Let's find before you bail. You're gonna find somebody open. I think that was how he was taught, or you know, similar. And I think that game necessitated it, right? He saw like, look, this pass rush is going to be a problem. Even Paris Johnson was getting beat in the first half. You know, like that was a fight or flight instinct. But then I think at some point in the game, he realized, no, this is a weapon. This is not just a break glass in case of emergency option. This is something I can use. I don't think it'll ever be a massive part of his game. But, you know, could I see it being what Joe Burrow made it into, as far as like, 3rd and 6, you got 5 wide, everything's spread out, you know, defense and man coverage, they're gonna either heat me up or you know, play 2 high safeties, whatever the situation. Boom, I'm gonna take off and get some easy yards, but it's gonna be sparing. It's gonna be, you know, he can extend plays that way. So I'm hoping he folds it into his game more. It doesn't have to be his fastball. I think it has to be his changeup though. So I don't know. I'm just fascinated with him, and I think, like you said, everything is crisp. It looks clean. It looks right. Does he have the most amazing arm or no? But you know, his first touch, I believe, at Ohio State was a 48-yard touchdown run, and we went, you know, almost 2 years before we got to see that athleticism finally come out. But it's there. I think he's got it.
Do you have any concerns with the fact that he played with such great receiver talent, and where he ends up with the NFL, he probably isn't coming close to that initially?
Yeah, it's one of those sort of existential draft questions that I struggle with. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but I try not to punish people for playing with good players, right? Let's not hold it against them that he's playing with future NFL players. And, you know, I heard Nick Saban talking about it. Hey, Bryce Young went up against guys who are going to be in the NFL and going to make up the NFL for the next 3-4 years, you know, and I understood his answer, right? It's the same concept of, you know, the competition you play against, who's on your team, you know, what are the other outside factors there? Sometimes they do affect quarterback play, but yeah, I mean, it's tough to really, truly punish a kid for having that talent. But if you don't acknowledge that that's the fact, you know, like you mentioned Zach Wilson earlier, he had really good skill position talent for that level of college football in 2020, going up against some soft defenses, except for one, Coastal Carolina. So in that case, it was a little more, yeah, we gotta acknowledge this.
I think the one real concern I have about him having that kind of level of talent and then not right away is some of those really tight window throws where he
Good
knew
point.
that
Yeah.
if he put the right ball placement for Marvin Harrison Jr., he just knew Harrison Jr. was going to go get it. And that guy, if you were to project 2024 right now, he probably goes top 3.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right after Drake, May, and Caleb Williams. So
Yeah.
I think you kind of right, and it's that existential question there where you can't really punish him, but you have to at least acknowledge it. And that's something that if he goes to Carolina, he's probably in one of the best situations ever for a number 1 pick, considering what their infrastructure is, their coaching staff, their front office. But it's going to be a fascinating one to watch.
Yep. No, I like him a lot. I see a guy who could be both a game manager and somebody, as we saw in the Georgia game, making plays with his arms and his legs, somebody who can also take over a game at times. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know that he'll ever be a top 5 quarterback in this league, but I would be surprised if he doesn't have some extended success for a Goff-like period, if you want to use that kind of parallel there. I think he'll be a player that you don't maybe fall in love with, but there's a reason why Detroit is throwing its support behind Jared, because he makes the plays and he keeps the trucks moving on time.
Absolutely. And somebody who sometimes had to keep the chains moving on time by himself was Anthony Richardson. And Thomas says in the chat that Richardson sucks. Ask any Gator fan. Well, you're not going to find one more diehard than me, and that's not really the case. There's a lot of layers to the Anthony Richardson discussion, and what I came away with in having him my quarterback too was everything that you have with Richardson is super rare, and his major issues are very fixable. Now, will he be able to fix them is a completely different story, but you can fix how a guy utilizes his feet in the pocket. You can
Yep.
fix a guy playing within himself and playing calm. You can't fix a first-year starter running the entire offense from the line of scrimmage and being able to navigate full reads and wanting to throw the football before using his dynamic rushing ability. Where do you
Yep.
fall with Richardson? How do you feel about his potential like bust factor? Because with his issues, I think that's really the biggest question. Nobody questions his ceiling.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about just the bare baseline of what his running ability and his athleticism will give you, right? It'll
Mhm.
avoid some sacks. It'll obviously stress the defense and force them to, I don't know, maybe play zone with eyes on the quarterback more, or a spy, things like that. So that alone is what makes him day one ready, in my opinion, right? Like you go in and he'll be able to impact an offense from the get go with that. So is he a project? In some ways, yeah, but in some ways he isn't too. So it's funny because obviously you watch like the Utah opener, and he seemed to be toying with a very good defense at times and
Mhm.
looked in full control. And then the next week against a Kentucky team that wasn't its normal strength from recent years, Will Levis looked like the better quarterback that day. That was my feeling that day. Was that Anthony's still got some work to do, and he's got so yeah, that inexperience factor and some of that is there. Even at the combine, I don't know if you noticed, like during his throwing session, he came out real hot. First 8 or 10 throws, whatever it was, were crisp on the money. His feet were, perfectly lined up with his shoulders. He had really good balance and distribution of weight and everything. I'm not a quarterback guru by any means, but
Mhm.
I've sat around enough of them to know what they're looking for and to know how they look for that weight transfer and make sure those legs are being utilized the right way. By the end of the session, it did get a little sloppier, and he started throwing more with his arm and his upper body. So that part of it is going to take some time. But, you know, Cam Newton was a starting quarterback in 2020 with a pretty horrendous passing line. Not all his fault, but some of it was. And he was still deemed the best option there. So I think even if you struggle through some of his inconsistencies as a rookie, I wouldn't hesitate to play him. I really wouldn't. I think he's kind of got the makeup too of being willing to kind of accept and learn and grow on the fly.
Yeah, and you could kind of tell one of the things that was tough for Richardson is he grew up 15 minutes from the swamp. And
Yeah, right.
he was a
Yep.
hometown kid. You could tell after that first week, everybody's talking Heisman Trophy. He just looked like he was too much for him. The second he gets out of the swamp, goes to Tennessee, has one of the best games in the college football season last year, nearly 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and was this close to beating Tennessee at Neyland
He
Stadium.
was. Yep.
Thankfully for me, he covered the spread, and that's really what matters. And good teams win, great teams cover.
That's right.
Let's transition to Will Levis, because you mentioned that he looked better than Richardson in that game, which, quite frankly, I agree. Levis is there's so much context, and I say this all the time. Stats are great, but they mean nothing without context, as the context
Yeah.
is more important than the stat itself. Well, Levis had one NFL caliber receiver to throw to, Wan'Dale Robinson. That was for 1 year. Chris
Yeah.
Rodriguez is an NFL caliber back, but he lost like all of his offensive line from 2021. Rich Scangrello did not do him any favors, and the
Yep.
offense just looked awful. So when you kind of equate all of that into factor, like to me, Will Levis looks like Kirk Cousins that can make a Josh Allen type throw. Like he's just got that kind of howitzer, but like quick game, he processes really well. He hits it as targets. He knows how to read the field, but we just didn't get to see a lot of things at Kentucky. How are you parsing out the limitations the Kentucky offense had
Yeah.
versus what Will Levis can do?
Yeah, and with those injuries, with the shoulder and the foot injury or whatever, I mean, the quarterback run game was gone. Like that, even just the threat of that. Teams knew it, other than maybe like some short yardage stuff or, a change of pace play here and there. Like the stuff that we saw Liam Cohen, his OC in 2021 running, who's now back there. I mean, how many times have you seen that? I can't remember the last time an OC or a coach for any matter leaves a team 1 year, goes somewhere else. Both parties realized that it was better off with him there. He goes back. I think Levis would have flourished had he had another year under Cohen and they had a little bit more talent around him. But I think the injuries factored it. The offensive line definitely, I noticed that, especially late in the year as they, were banged. Everybody else was banged up too. Rodriguez wasn't running with the same sort of power. Everything was breaking down, and it just took some of the teeth out of that. It was funny because, like, I think during some of the scripted portions of games, he performed pretty well. It was almost like once you got past the first quarter or so, there's third possession or whatever, it looked like the play calling was a little bit chaotic, and I'm not putting it all on Rich. I'm just saying it was almost like he didn't know what to do with this group and with a banged up Levis. So context is huge with him. It's huge with Richardson. It's huge with Young. Stroud's the only guy who I feel like you can, even with the talent question, I think you can kind of look at in a vacuum and evaluate cleaner than the other guys. So it's tough. I mean, you see that tight, quick release. You see the arm talent. You see him able to make, he made against my school, Missouri. I think it was about the first or second play of the game. He made a throw outside the numbers over the receiver's shoulder against an NFL type corner in Chris Abrams-Drain that I don't know that anyone else in this class makes. So you see those and you think, is he Josh Allen that we're, hiding in plain sight? I can't go there, but I can also say that I think it's a mistake overlooking him and dismissing him as a future bust. But his confidence is fun too. I mean, that's a big part of his game.
Not everybody can eat a banana without peeling it first. That's for sure.
He's gone to lengths, by the way, to dismiss all the, the mayo in the coffee and all that. Like, he has made sure that people understand that was a joke, people. It's like, he's got a little edge to him too. I kind of like the guy.
Hey, anybody who's willing to do that on camera in today's social media age, that says a lot about their confidence.
Yeah.
The last guy we're going to talk about here is a guy that you have to have heavy context with, and that's Hendon Hooker. Mm-hmm. I wrote a long piece about why I don't think the Vikings should draft Hendon Hooker in the first 2 rounds, mainly because everything he was asked to do in that veer and shoot from Josh Heupel was to maximize effectiveness in the college game. I couldn't take a lot of that and project it to the NFL, and I really worried about the fact that he really can't create. It's either he tucks in and runs or he throws the football. How do you translate Hendon Hooker's game in college to the NFL? And with how much I think he has to learn, I think being 25 is a really big red flag for me.
Yeah. I mean, obviously a lot of the 1 or 2 read progressions or the half field reads and stuff, that's a concern for sure. I'll have to go back and look. It does sort of feel like you said he can't create. One of the other elements of that too, I think, is that, I think there was some design run stuff that helped free him up, but I don't know that his athletic ability is going to be really shocking. It's going to be more like Geno Smith, where, you can sprinkle it in. I don't know that he's going to be somebody who dances and darts around, especially coming off the ACL. So, when is he going to be healthy? You're already losing a year for a 25-year-old. That is a concern, right? To me, that doesn't read first-round pick, at least not in this day and age, and certainly not for a team like the Vikings or something like that, or the Browns or whoever else. So all those things are absolutely fair criticisms, but you've got a big, experienced, athletic kid with big hands, great turnover numbers, like takes care of the football. So there's some traits there that I don't think you can just sort of gloss over and forget about. But 2 years ago, I didn't see an NFL quarterback. I didn't see one in Will Levis, for that matter, at Penn State. But so he has come a long way. The question is, is he close to his ceiling? And is there a plan B as far as his development? Can you put him in one of these multi-read offenses and expect him to break it down? And if so, when? 2 years, 3, 4? I don't know.
Yeah. Let me ask you this really quick question. Then I kind of want to tie this into what the Vikings should do. If Hendon Hooker had everything for him at Tennessee, like he does now, he tore his ACL, but he was coming into this draft at 21. How does that change his stock for you?
If he came into last year's draft, you mean?
No, if he was in this draft with everything we know about him, but he was 21 years old, how does that change his stock for you?
Yeah, right. He goes way up. I mean, there's no doubt. 4 years or 3.5 years of untapped potential there, or whatever. Yeah, that's the perfect situation. Then he is your ideal, groom quarterback for a bridge guy or the outgoing starter, whatever you want to call him. And I think it would be fair to suggest that, like, maybe he's not your QB2 right away, but he could be your QB1 down the road. So that changes a lot of it. I think the age is a big deal.
Yeah. The Vikings obviously need to address quarterback of the future, and we talked about it here. But they don't necessarily have to go with a rookie. They could choose a veteran out. They could figure out a way to re-sign Kirk Cousins. They could try to enter the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes. If you were sitting in the chair of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah right now, Eric, what would your plan of attack be? How would you address the quarterback of the future?
Yeah, I think you'd have to see how the early part of round one goes. Like, let's see past, I would guess, the Raiders 7, Falcons 8. I don't care what they've said about Desmond Ridder. I mean, for that matter, Desmond Ridder is a little bit like Hendon Hooker. I mean, there were some things there that overlap, I think, and that's why, he was a third-round pick. And there's some, do the Falcons love him as a starter, right? Once you kind of get past that phase of the draft, you start thinking about, okay, what about the Titans at 11? If he's slipping past that, if Will Levis or, I guess whoever QB4 would be, you got to look into it. I mean, especially if you think you maybe overachieved a little bit last year, there's a potential for slightly underachieving this year after, I mean, I think it's a fair question to say, what's to stop them from trading up unless they feel like, okay, we have a path with Kirk that we're going to take going forward. And yeah, like you said, let's find a revised deal and make him our guy for the next couple of years. Because I don't really think Kirk's been the problem, but I think you actually have to think about, like, at the cost, moving on, all that stuff. I don't know. Are you in a different path than that? Would you rather just sort of think about a Tanner McKee or somebody like that, or are you going a different route?
The one thing that this town does not want is another Christian Ponder. There is a large segment of the fan base, and our friends at Score North and Purple Daily, who host the top 10 football podcast in the nation, they talked about Christian Ponder PTSD, where they just don't want to see that kind of bust against. They don't even want to try, and I think they're right. I don't want to take a guy. I want to take the guy, and if the guy is not available in round one, you trade down, get some assets. I'm really intrigued by Clayton Tune from Houston. I think that there's something there. I thought he was a guy preseason who could have maybe made the leap to quarterback 3 because we had so much uncertainty with Stroud and
I'm pointing to Tune.
Hey, no, you're fine. I get the points wrong all the time. Just ask producer Dave. So I thought Tune could be a guy. I really like Jake Haener, but I don't know if his ceiling's anywhere close to something you can develop. I absolutely love Jaren Hall, but he's also 25 years old. But he's 25 years old in a different element. Obviously, you have the Mormon Mission baseball player, and he drops the ball in a bucket better than I think anybody in this class as far as those deep shots. He's so good, but I want them to at least take a shot at quarterback somewhere in the draft. But if it's not the guy early, take a guy I think you can develop and see what happens. Like, you never know. Brock Purdy started the NFC Championship game as the last pick last year. Skylar Thompson started a playoff game and played pretty well against the Buffalo Bills. you can't find a gem unless you take a shot.
I admit I did not see it with Purdy. I loved him as a sophomore. By the end of his senior year, I was done with him, and I failed to realize. I just failed to realize, like, kind of the same deal we were talking about earlier. Like, he didn't have a whole lot around him. He had to do a lot of that stuff to give them a chance to win. So, yeah, I mean, there's that type of player can't be overlooked. But I like some of your choices there, especially Toon and Jaron Hall. I mean, Jaron had a pretty bad first day of the Senior Bowl, and I think that probably hurt him. He's a better player than what we saw down there.
Yeah, and it did come out later that he was playing with a high ankle sprain, which
I didn't even realize that. That helps.
Fun fact, I sat next to him at the airport Friday afternoon as he was flying out of town because he missed the game. No, he had tape all over his ankle. It looked pretty rough, but yeah. Hey, kudos on him for actually going out and competing, because a lot of guys still wouldn't have done that. Eric, we're going to try and get you out of here in a little bit, but I want to at least touch on your mock draft that you released yesterday for NFL.com. You had the Vikings selecting Kalijah Cansey, the defensive tackle from Pitt. My biggest question is, how do you see his fit with the Brian Flores defense?
I know that was the biggest thing. I thought about that, and I don't know that there's a round one D tackle outside of Jalen Carter, but who the Vikings obviously would be smart to do work on and everything, because you never know what his stock is going to be. But he's a different kind of player, and he doesn't necessarily fit in what you'd expect them to run. But I think you could use him as kind of a sub package rusher early to give that third down group a little bit more juice. And sometimes these mocks are hard for him because you don't see an obvious fit for one team, and you think, boy, I could see this group moving up, or this team is a definite trade down candidate. So, unless you're projecting a bunch of trades, and I had a couple in round one in that mock, but I was like, is Cansey perfect? No, but he sort of fills a need, if you will, of wanting to add pressure. I mean, they're pretty thin up front, I think, right now. I mean, I don't know. But yeah, the size questions are going to be a big issue for that kind of defense, no doubt.
Absolutely. Before we get Eric out of here, Dave, do you have any questions for him about quarterbacks?
No, they're the bane of my existence. I just hope the Vikings find one.
Isn't that terrible? You hate the position, but you need it, right? That's the worst of both worlds.
We haven't had that franchise one since Tarkington. Now you could debate whether Culpepper was, but it's been so long. I would love to find that individual.
I know.
Hopefully in this draft.
I mean, I think it's going to be tough unless there is that guy who slides. And I think Levis is the most likely candidate of the four. I suppose that there could be a scenario where the other ones do, but that's the one to keep an eye on. I'm glad you're writing about that, because, I did consider a trade up for them. I did consider a possibility where Levis slid in that mock. And yeah, he's the one that makes the most sense from Minnesota's perspective, in my opinion, right now.
Especially with the connection with Kevin O'Connell and Liam Cohen, being that they work together with the Los Angeles Rams. Eric, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. Tell us where everybody can find you. And I know you guys have some good stuff coming up on NFL.com.
We do, yeah. NFL.com. I've got my mock up there now. I'm trying to think what the next thing is. I'll be updating some draft needs. I do the AFC. My editor, Dan Parr, does the NFC team. So Vikings people, send your hate mail to him, not me, okay? And I've got something working on the Georgia prospects down the road a little bit. That should be a fun story, kind of a historical look, and also look at their draft dominance. And also, I think I've got my top 100 list I got to update soon. So there's a lot in the hopper, man. I gotta keep about 6 balls up in the air from now till April 20, whatever,
Hey, at least you get to do it all in one place. I got about 6 or 7 different balls up, and they're all.
You wear a lot of hats. Yes, you do.
Yes, I do. One final question for you. There's a lot of debate, and Dave kind of mentioned it with Dante Culpepper. Who do you think is the off the cuff, best quarterback in Vikings history between the two? Dante Culpepper or Kirk Cousins?
Wow, that's tough, man. I mean, Culpepper's highs were pretty darn high.
Yeah,
I think
almost
Kirk
won the
gets.
MVP.
I know. Man, that 1 year, well, man, it looked like he was going to be this generational guy, and then it just didn't happen. And it was like, what's going on?
Shredded knee.
Yeah, he just wasn't the same after it, was he? I mean, obviously Miami was proof of that, but I don't know. What do you take? The guy with the brilliant essentially short career, or the one who's been pretty steady for a while? Maybe I'm still picking. If it's like a 1-game deal, I'm picking Culpepper. But for the body of work, maybe it's Kirk.
I'm a pro Dante guy, but
I love him.
I also look at the context of what he had to deal with, carrying like 30th ranked defenses to the playoffs, having to do everything himself. And the Red McCombs is so cheap that he wouldn't upgrade anything. When a coach got fired, they wouldn't let the team replace him. Mike Tyson's the lowest paid coach, and that was a huge deal. Like, that's kind of where I'm at. But he
had to pay for the pencil in his ear. That's how cheap Red was. Right?
Exactly.
And now the Vikings are number 1 according to the NFLPA report card. So we've got a good group. Eric, thank you very much, my friend. I look forward to chatting with you again down the line. And this is going to be a fun draft season. We're 30 days away. Thank goodness.
I know, it's crazy. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it. I always love helping on.
Thanks, Eric.
My pleasure. From Eric, from Dave, I'm Tyler. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!